What's changed since last year? First of all, let's talk about the response we got. A quarter of our respondents were 0 to 5 years. Again, always a pretty strong group. A fourth were 6 to 10. About the same. About 13% were 11 to 15. We got a lot more seasoned, more veteran scouts, I think, that wanted to know more about where they stood. About a third, up from about a quarter last year. I've gotten a lot of calls from scouts that are in this tier lately, wanting to know, hey, where do I stand? What should I be making? If I get a director level job, if I get an assistant director level job, what should I be asking for? And I think as we refine our survey and we change it and add different things and take away some things, we're going to start to look to more than just have the 125 plus tier. We probably will go 125 to 150 and even 150 to 175 going forward. But right now, that's where our information lies. At least that's how it was last year and this year. Next frame, please. Okay, so salaries are slightly up since last year for the 6 to 10 year tier. 83% of scouts at this tier make 80,000 plus. Last year it was 75. So not a major jump, but a jump nonetheless. Is better than a dip, that's for sure. About a third at that 6 to 10 year are making 80 to 100. Another third make 125 plus. So depending on the team you're with, you could be making a pretty good amount, again, for being kind of that middle tier. And also, as with last year, about half make $100,000 or more at the 6 to 10 year tier. So not a bad place to be, again, unless you're comparing it to scouts. Next frame, please. Okay. And the more seasoned tier, and again, this is one where we didn't gather as much information, so I want to say that as I introduce this, but there seemed to be maybe a little bit of movement backwards in salaries, possibly due to teams clearing out high salaried scouts. I went through and did some research to look at how many scouts in that 11 to 15 year tier got released after the 2020 draft. And what I found was that most of them were actually 18 to 25 year service type scouts, so even more seasoned ones. So I'm not sure what I attribute this kind of drawback to, and I'm not even sure necessarily that it's reliable information because this is our tier where we were least responsive. However, it's something we'll monitor going forward. Okay. Now let's go ahead. Next. Okay, there we go. All right. So again, this is your 16 plus year tier. Your more seasoned people. Pretty much the same results. You're looking at about $125,000 a year for almost everyone. There are a few that aren't, but for the overwhelming majority are at that 125 plus tier. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll change our numbers up a little bit next year, so we can measure the ceiling a little bit more so than we have in the past. Once again, and I think I mentioned this earlier, salaries seem to be irrespective of title. Even if you're an area scout, if you get to 15, 16 years, you're getting close to 200. You're at least at the 150 mark, or at least you should be. And again, that's even if you're not even an assistant director or anything along those lines. I would include national scout in there, but not necessarily. There are area scouts who are making 150, 160, 170, who are 15 years plus, but don't have any director level experience. That's where you kind of need to be right now. Next frame, please. All right, so if you're new to scouting, your salary kind of depends on the team you work for. There are some teams that are really paying their new scouts well, and maybe that's because they want to retain them. Maybe they feel like that's a reward for having moved up to the system, been a scouting assistant, maybe been a scouting coordinator, and then become an area scout. So we're seeing that just because you're new to the business doesn't mean you're necessarily making $15 an hour, hanging out, doing a getting McDonald's kind of pay. It's getting better. It seems to be, at least. Now, if you're at 6 to 10 years, salaries are slightly up. You have a chance of making $100,000 pretty quickly before you have a decade in the business. So I don't know that I want to say that the era of the 2020 guy is gone, but it certainly, I think that newer scouts are, while cheaper than older scouts, are still getting compensated a little better than they were in previous generations. And I think that's a positive move, and I'm pretty excited about that. Again, we need more data on the 11 to 15 segment, but right now it looks like perhaps, and I say this with an asterisk, maybe they're making a little bit less than they did last year. Hopefully we'll get more response next year and we'll get a little better idea of the data. And then once you get to 16 years, as I mentioned earlier, you should be making at least 125 and probably significantly higher than that. Next frame, please. All right, so let's talk a little bit about scouting assistants. There are opportunities this year. When I went into this and when I approached it, and I started reaching out to some of my friends that are director level and that do the hiring, I anticipated them saying, "Hey, listen, our budgets are a lot slimmer. There's a lot of uncertainty for the 2021 season regarding stadiums and how full they'll be. We're being told that our budget that we're not going to be able to hire as many scouting assistants. We're probably going to have to do more work with the people that we have." That's not the response I got, and again, I was a little surprised by that. One thing we did find after we looked at the numbers over the last 3 years is you're looking at about 11 to 12 scouting assistants hired across the league. 11 in 2020 after the 2020 draft, 11 after the 19 draft, and 12 after the 18 draft. So it's not a lot of scouting assistants either way, but it looks like right now those opportunities are not going to be diminished. And again, when I say scouting assistant, I don't mean scouting intern. I'm talking about the ones who have kind of graduated from training camp intern, the guys that have graduated from staple guy or coffee guy, and are actually doing a little bit more of the work of being a scout. These guys are going to be groomed for area jobs. Another thing that I can say conclusively, despite the fact, I'm always talking to people that are pretty accomplished and working in college personnel departments where salaries are really, really making strides. We're looking at $200,000 for player personnel directors at P5 schools. General managers are making sometimes 400,000. I know that's going to make a lot of people on this broadcast pretty angry, but it's the reality of the situation. Anyway, at any rate, notwithstanding the fact that these salaries are getting better, I still talk to people that are making decent money in colleges and they want to break in the NFL. There's something about that brand that makes it different from everywhere else. And I don't know if that'll ever change. It's kind of like agents. I mean, as many negative agent stories as there are out there and as many go out and crash and burn, there seem to be two to replace every one that gets out. And I think that's pretty much true for scouting as well. The assistant and intern jobs vary across the league by length of position as well. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't acknowledge. Some teams are only bringing guys in for 9 months, some for 2 years, some kind of somewhere in between there. And some are more loyal, I think, to their scouting assistants than others. That's there's kind of a very level, kind of a spectrum there that I didn't expect to find, but the more that I study this, it's something that I've found. Next frame, please. Okay, and again, this is something that I've already kind of touched on, but budgets were expected to contract, but right now, it's not something that I've seen. I spoke to 4 directors, college directors. All of them said they expect status quo. Now, one of the teams did say that they've tried to automate things a bit more with regard to what they do and what they ask for. I didn't get to expand on that. I don't know if that means bigger and better computers. I don't know if that meant bigger and better computer systems, software. I don't know exactly what that meant, but I think it's obviously realistic and reasonable to expect that more and more teams will do that, given the fact that we're still not out of this pandemic and we still don't know exactly what direction everything's going to go. In the background, I guess as a backdrop to all this, and one reason why I think things are going to stay status quo, or at least I hope, is that we're going to have a 2020 draft class that's bursting at the seams, given the fact that the NCAA extended the careers of seniors if they wanted to take that extra year. Whereas we've got a much slimmer draft class this year, and I've detailed that pretty often on my blog at Succeed in Football, as well as in my posts at Inside the League. But it's going to be very much of a seller's market if you're a player this year, far more so than you have in the past. The other side of that coin is that the 2022 class is going to be brimming with players that would otherwise have been day 3 picks or undrafted free agents that may not even get tryouts. Again, presuming we have tryouts next year. Because the number is going to be higher, I expect that teams are looking at that and thinking we're going to need to keep our scouting assistants. We're going to need to get them coached up and ready so that we can run pro days. We can run all the things you have to do to get a draft class ready. And that may be one reason why it looks like the market's going to still be pretty strong for scouting assistants. We also saw last year, and I referenced this earlier, that a lot of teams extended scouts that may have been let go last year, again, because they weren't sure what direction everything was going to go. Whereas I thought there would be a pretty heavy turnover after this draft. I'm not sure that's going to be the case this year. Now, the caveat, obviously, that we have 7 new general managers. So there'll be a lot of turnover in that regard, just because general managers are coming in and trying to remold their scouting departments, bring in people they trust, and make decisions on scouts that perhaps otherwise wouldn't be let go. So there is that caveat. But aside from those 7 teams where that's going on, I don't know that necessarily we're going to see a bloodbath, a real dip. I guess a lot of scouts turned out. And again, that's just me reading the industry based on the people that I've spoken to. I could be wrong, but I hope that I'm not. I hope that it's a pretty stable year for scouts and what have you. Okay, next frame, please. So again, just going in a little bit more detail with the teams that I spoke to, with the 3. Actually, I spoke to a 4th one after I got this done. One said he expects mostly status quo. The second one said that his team has automated it, so they may have a few more. They may only have 2 this year, where they normally have 5, which means they won't be filling positions that they would otherwise fill. That's a negative, but it certainly wasn't the consensus for everyone. And the third team said because of the conditions and because it's harder to gather information given the restrictions that schools have put on scouts, he expected that they would be pretty much status quo in what they would do. They would have they would keep their more seasoned scouts, or maybe look for scouts with more experience, but no impact on scouting assistant hires. The 4th team that I spoke to kind of was the same as the 3rd one, looking to keep their experienced guys and probably do about the same what they've done with scouting assistants in the past. Next frame, please. So all this information, guys, it's not for me, it's for you. If you're watching this, if you have stuck around this long, you must have a pretty good passion for the industry. You may work in the industry. You may have any number of maybe you're an agent who just wants to know more about what pay looks like and what to expect, and so you can kind of especially if you represent a director or someone along those lines. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email is stratton@insidetheleague.com. You can DM me at Inside the League on Twitter. My DMs are open, and I love to hear from you. You can also reach me through the Contact Us link at www.insidetheleague.com, the mothership. And finally, this video will be up on the Inside the League YouTube page next month, if not sooner. Rick and his team will be putting this all together, cutting it up, chopping it up, so it's not one big blob. It's not going to be an hour-long presentation. It'll be the different looks and different things. And if you look at our previous seminars and what Rick has done with them, then you'll see kind of what style we will pursue there. So that concludes our evening. Thank you so much for being part of our first ever live stream ITL seminar. Thanks so much to Hound Talent. Thanks so much to Barry Ozer from Magnolia Capital Partners. Thanks for being part of our team. Thank you for being our family. And if you're watching this, you're part of our family too. Whether you're an agent, whether you're a scout, whether you're a coach, maybe you're a parent, maybe you're a player, maybe you aspire to be one of those things. We hope that we can work with you. We look forward to working with you, and we admire your passion for the game, and we share that passion as well.